It's October, which means that we finally get to start looking forward towards the Heisman Trophy. I think that you can start to see this Heisman race materialize before our eyes. And there's some players that we did not expect that are playing themselves into the conversation. So listen, I know it's my first one that I've done of these on the show. It's the first week of October. So I don't want to just sit here and say like, hey, it's a 4-man thing. Hey, these are my top 5. No. I've got plenty more than 5 because I think there are performances and players that have been worthy to be mentioned in a discussion like this. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm not just going to throw them out there willy-nilly and throw spaghetti at the wall. What I want to do is I want to tier them for you. I'm going to have tier 1 Heisman favorites. I'm going to have tier 2 guys that are playing themselves into the conversation, and then tier 3 guys who, with the right performances in October and early November, are going to move themselves up to tier 2 and potentially even tier 1 status. So let's get started. Let's go with tier 1. Who's my first guy in tier 1?
CJ Stroud.
This one is a no-brainer, guys. All right, you're all rolling your eyes, and we get it, right? And Buckeye fans, you see it week in and week out. This guy is the cream of the crop right now, in particular with the injury to Bryce Young in college football. He's the best quarterback right now in the nation. That's the best offense in the nation. He will be there so long as they continue to play this way, which they will. Let me just tell you, they're about to face a really bad defense in Michigan State. He's going to be right here. You look at what he's been able to do, 68%. He's thrown for, 18 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. He's had to deal with the fact that the running back that we felt like was going to get the bulk of the carries has not, in Travion Henderson, and he hasn't had his best offensive weapon in Jackson Smith and Jigba. So he's doing this, putting himself right at the top of this race, even without his best skill position player. I thought he made some huge throws against Notre Dame in that game. And that stage and that moment was important for what I'll get into at the end of this list. You think about what he's got ahead of him, by the way. He still has the Penn State game. He still has Michigan and beyond. He'll have likely a conference championship game potentially. And then after that, we'll be voting for the Heisman Trophy. All right, who's next on tier 1?
Bryce Young.
This is a no-brainer. He's the defending Heisman Trophy winner, although now we call into question, what's his status going to be moving forward? What is the health of Bryce Young moving forward? I did this on a radio show, and I hesitate to do it a little bit. It's very gross. I had an AC joint sprain. Mine was actually blown totally out. It sounds like his is a lesser degree injury than what I had. But I'll just show you like this. I can kind of pull this up. See that? Yeah, that's my shoulder. I got a lump in my shoulder. Those of you who are just listening to this, kudos to you because you did not just see this injury. If you want to see it, you can go to YouTube. You can go to my social media pages because there'll be pictures of my gross shoulder. I had an AC joint. I know exactly what he's dealing with. Here's the main point, though. He can play through this, in particular if it's a lesser degree than what I dealt with, which was a totally blown out AC joint. I played 2.5 weeks later, and he'll be back on the field. I think that he can still be very effective. It remains to be seen how quickly he will be on the field, but this is clearly going to hurt his bottom line. Bryce Young won the Heisman Trophy in large part due to the fact that he had incredible numbers last year. And the hard part in trying to defend that or win it in back-to-back years is that a lot of voters, good, bad, or indifferent, by the way, right or wrong, are going to hold him to that standard, not just whatever standard is in front of him with his peers this season. Now, I don't think that that's the correct way to vote or look at it, but I am at least acknowledging the reality that that's likely how voters will look at Bryce Young. So he'll have to do something that's better than 47 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, and 324 yards passing per game. He's not going to be close to that. At least I don't think, in particular with this injury. He's sitting at 14 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, and only 240 yards per game. So he's going to need to get healthy, one, and then he's going to have some monster games through the middle of this schedule. And remember, he was a beast late against Texas, 15 of 19 in the fourth quarter. We've seen him on the stage. He still has the champ game and beyond. This is a guy that's going to be there until the end. All right, I've only got one other player in my tier 1. Who is it?
Caleb Williams.
I mean, and by the way, this is the episode where all the Oklahoma fans are just going to throw up the entire episode. I'm sorry, OU fans, but listen, this is the name of the game. Caleb Williams is clearly playing himself into the Heisman conversation. He's on tier 1. And I think to not acknowledge that is just being a hater. He has elevated this team, not single-handedly. Obviously, there's a lot of other transfers, but it's pretty clear that without a great defense, the entire show is that offense for the Trojans, and he is the trigger man. All right, he's not turning the ball over. 12 touchdowns, didn't have an interception until late last week. I think that this is the type of guy that could have the stages in front of him, whether it's Utah coming up, UCLA, a Pac-12 championship game, and where they came from a year ago without him. Yeah, granted, Lincoln Riley's going to get a lot of credit, but there are a lot of voters that are going to start looking at Caleb Williams and being like, man, you're a difference maker pretty clearly, judging by where they came from a year ago and then where they're at this year. So Caleb Williams clearly in my tier 1. All right, let's move away from tier 1. Okay, so those are the 3 guys that are kind of clearly up there. They're quarterbacks. We get it. You knew that those guys were going to be on the list. Now let's get to some guys that have played themselves into the discussion that you might not be thinking about. Let's talk about, tier 2 Heisman hopefuls. Let me start my tier 2 with running back from Michigan, Blake Corum. All right, and this is not just because I saw him in the last 2 weeks. Blake Corum is going to be on my tier 2. Jalen Daniels, the quarterback from Kansas, is going to be on my tier 2. Hendon Hooker, the Tennessee quarterback, has played himself directly onto my tier 2. And then this is the one that I think might be interesting. Adrian Martinez from Kansas State has played himself into my tier 2. Let me take these one by one. Let's start with Blake Corum. Blake Corum, 2 weeks ago against Maryland, had to, because of injury and fumble woes, be the absolute bell cow for Michigan. They don't like doing that, by the way. They love to split carries. I know Hassan Haskins got a ton of carries late last year, but why was that? Injury to Blake Corum. And then all of a sudden you've got Donovan Edwards that was banged up against Maryland, wasn't playing in the game. CJ Stokes, their freshman back, fumbles early in the game, and they're like, man, it's all about Blake Corum. And Maryland, they were going to be a very tough out that day in the big house unless Blake Corum was going to play great, and he did. So he's reliant. Now in back-to-back weeks, and now they go to Iowa. This was the number 1 scoring defense in the country. This is Iowa's defense that is clearly one of the better defenses in the country, and this dude put up 29 carries for over 100 yards. So in back-to-back weeks, he's gone 59 carries for 376 yards over 2 weeks. That's sensational stuff, folks. And he's got all the stages in front of him to get himself into that conversation. Penn State, at Ohio State. Maybe not better stages than Blake Corum or even CJ Stroud to some degree. All right, now Jalen Daniels. Okay, so Jalen Daniels, this is like my favorite story in college football, is what Kansas is doing. And Lance Leipold is going to get a lot of credit and a lot of attention, by the way, with some of these open Power 5 jobs. But the other guy that's going to start getting a lot of credit and should and will and is Jalen Daniels. Jalen Daniels has been outstanding for Kansas. He is the reason why they're in this moment as an undefeated hosting game day, hosting an undefeated TCU. This snapshot this week for the Jayhawks is about the fact that Jalen Daniels has been so good. You look at what he's done throwing the ball, 68%, 9.2 yards per attempt, 11 touchdowns, 1 interception. That's outstanding stuff. But it's not just his ability to throw the ball, it's his ability as a runner as well. He's rushing it for over 7 yards per carry, and he's had 5 touchdowns. Now, this is what I think is so good for Jalen Daniels. Jalen Daniels might not need his team to be great at the top end because the story of Kansas is resonating wildly in college football, and rightly so. So it might just be where he needs to play his team to an 8-9 win season in order to potentially go to New York. And that would be a huge deal for Kansas. I don't think it's as important that he has the stages. It's not as important that his team play for a conference championship or a playoff spot because they're 5-0 and ranked because of this kid. They were at the bottom of the barrel. and have risen to the point where they are playing meaningful games in October in our sport because of Jalen Daniels. If I move on to Hendon Hooker, I just think he's played outstanding football. 71%, 8 touchdowns, no interceptions. He was phenomenal against Florida in that game. He had 349 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, 112 on the ground, and a touchdown. That's 461 total yards and 3 touchdowns. That's outstanding stuff. Now, here's the problem for Hendon Hooker, is it's about to get a lot tougher for him and his teammates at Tennessee. I think that Tennessee, unfortunately, is a bit of fool's gold right now. I don't think that they're going to get through this stretch. They've got out LSU. They've got Bama coming up at home. They've got at Georgia. This is not the year that they're going to make a run, in part because of their schedule. But that doesn't mean that you don't acknowledge what Hendon Hooker has done up to this point. And then my last guy in tier 2 is Adrian Martinez, and that's the one that's going to raise some eyebrows. But people, like, he has played unbelievable in the last couple of weeks. That performance against Oklahoma was transcendent. And I also think that this is an amazing comeback story from what he was at Nebraska, the way that ended under Scott Frost and with that fan base, to show up at Kansas State, clearly be gun shy early in the season and not playing his best, and then show up the way that he did against Oklahoma on the road. That's outstanding stuff, and I love it. He has come alive, 300 yards rushing over the last 2 games, 669 total yards over the last 2 games, and he's got 9 rushing touchdowns on the year, which is second only to Blake Corum in college football, who leads the country and why he's in my tier 2 as well with his 10 rushing touchdowns. Last tier is just going to get mentions. The third tier guys, here are guys that have some stages and they've got some games ahead of them that could put them on the map. But here are those guys, okay? These are shout-outs. Shout-outs in the Heisman watch. DJ Uiagalelei. I thought he's been great over the last couple of weeks. The problem is they don't have a lot of marquee games from this point on in that horrendous, I shouldn't say horrendous. That was in a weak ACC. That was a better way to put it. A weak ACC. Dorian Thompson-Robinson. How about the way he played against Washington? Now he's got a stage against Utah this week as UCLA takes on the Utes, that UCLA team, undefeated. DTR playing really well. He's got a chance. Jahmyr Gibbs, in particular, without Bryce Young out there this week and maybe in coming weeks, if Bryce Young is not out there, they will run the crap out of the ball. With Jalen Milroy, they will run the crap out of the ball. You literally read Nick Saban's lips when he was screaming, "Run the ball!" So I think Jahmyr Gibbs is going to have a couple of monster weeks coming up, and he could play himself into this conversation. Spencer Sanders, by the way, at Oklahoma State. Anybody mentioning Oklahoma State? I think that's the first time so far on this podcast. More to come here in this episode. Brock Bowers for Georgia. If he continues to have performances like he's had, he will play himself into the conversation. And then Max Duggan as well, the quarterback at TCU, because they were fantastic against Oklahoma last week at home. Now they've got the stage against Kansas and an undefeated matchup there in Lawrence. Now, quick discussion about the Heisman Trophy, because as we all know, it really comes down to 3 things for the Heisman Trophy, and this is why I created this list here. You've got to be a great player. That goes without being said. But you usually have to play on a great, if not very prominent team in college football. If you look at the playoff era, there's only been one Heisman winner that didn't go to the playoff, and that was Lamar Jackson in 2016. His Louisville team was 9-4 after it was all said and done. But remember, this guy was transcendent the way that he played the game. He had 5,100 total yards. He ran for 1,500, threw for 3,500. That's absurd. So that's why he won the Heisman Trophy. Is his greatness as a player overcame the fact that his team wasn't great on the top end. And then the last thing that you have to have is huge stages and moments and performances in those stages and moments. So as you're seeing this list play their games through October and into early November, that's the lens with which you've got to view all of this through. Are they playing great? Is it for a prominent team that's likely to go to the playoff? And is the performance matching the stage and some of their biggest performances and stages that they have during the course of the season? Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoy that clip, make sure you click subscribe somewhere down here. From game highlights to exclusive interviews and rankings, we've got everything you need as a college football fan right here, College Football on Fox.